Hey, so I've been thinking about, I've been annoyed by this IQ focus. This idea that IQ is, it's kind of a weird thing to say, but IQ is supposed to be a determinant of how successful you are, but the measure of success is not necessarily happiness. There's too much focus placed on IQ as something that is generally immutable, and something that is and because it's immutable, it's basically a genetic characteristic. It's heritable, so it's something that you basically can't change. And because you can't change it, that makes it like a political statement, or like a sociological idea that you have to either oppose or support or something like that. It's like some kind of political motive. I don't understand it. And I also don't understand why the focus is so heavily on one number. A number that is, it's the result of testing. And a test is, who made the first IQ test, and what did they test for, and how did they compare that test against other tests when there pretty much weren't other tests. Obviously it does measure something. Whether or not that measure is whether or not what it measures is a good indicator of something is a good question. It seems to be a good indicator of financial success, of income. However, achieving a high income is not the same as achieving happiness or being content with your life. It's actually, it's usually the opposite. The higher intelligence people have other issues, other mental issues, other social issues. It's being any kind of outlier, any kind of genetic outlier usually has bonus features that come along with it. Now, I have pretty serious blind spots in certain areas. That is a result of my overly analytical thinking. That is just really bad. Not fun to mess around with. Not fun to suffer with. And it's not something that other people understand all the time. So it's not that great. But the idea that, well, if you have an IQ, then that's the ideal, like this is some unattainable thing that, well, things would be different in my life if only I had a different IQ, if only I was smarter. That's not quite how it works, The best analogy that I've heard for it is from Vox Day, who says that if you have a gun, or if you have a weapon, you're firing a projectile. Goodness, I'm never going to make a left turn. Your IQ is the bore of that weapon. So if your bullet is this big around, you're going to do some damage on target. But if it's this big around, then you're going to do a lot more damage on the target. But then, using that analogy, I'm a big brain time right here. You have to decide. This is polarized. Matching the polarity of my polarized sunglasses was not something that I had considered for the OLED display on that thing. If you have a big bore weapon that you're firing and you can do massive damage to the target, you need to be able to understand, first of all, do you have the ammunition to put into that gun to be able to fire that bullet? And the ammunition is generally education, knowledge, any kind of practical experience that you can have that will enable you to actually be able to have some effect. So having ammunition to put into that gun is a big thing. The next thing is, are you willing to pull the trigger on that gun? Which is to say, are you someone who is incredibly lazy and doesn't get stuff done, and has bad workflow habits and bad task management, and basically it's like you're an intelligent layabout who never pulls the trigger on anything, or, you know, half pulls the trigger. You know, you're not accomplishing any effect if you're not pulling the trigger. So do you have that? Do you have the action, the ability to be able to pull the trigger multiple times, to reload, you know, to take the time? So do you have the ammunition, and do you have the drive, the will to pull the trigger? Next, where are you aiming it? Where are you aiming that weapon? What are you trying to destroy, or what are you trying to improve, or what are you trying to change? What are you trying to have an impact on? And if you're trying to have an impact on, you know, making leaves so they have purple polka dots, well, you can have a giant, you know, galaxy brain IQ, and you achieve the genetic modifications required to make trees have purple polka dots on their leaves, and no one cares, because that's not a useful thing to target or a useful thing to accomplish, and certainly not something that people would pay tons and tons of money for. And that's the other thing that kind of bugs me of this whole IQ argument, is like, well, IQ is a good measure of your future earnings, which is like, that is your this is the American ideal, the capitalist ideal. It's like, you made good money, so you're good. No, that's not how that works. Yeah, you made money, so you're happy. You made more money, so you're happier. No, just no, and stop trying to, stop trying to make it a thing. It's not a thing. It's ridiculous. So the other thing is, like, I have an above average IQ. I should be around, I think I'm around 120. I'm like tested around there, and that puts me in solid, like, midwit range, just the perfect range for just being a useful idiot, basically, or an intelligent idiot capable of convincing himself of things that he believes are true in order to make them true. Like, that's the idea, is that midwit. The midwit, by the way, is excellent rhetoric, and a real phenomenon that you should look into. But the idea is basically, you are smart enough to confirm your biases and not acknowledge, and not, like, you're smart enough to convince yourself that you're right, and you're capable of convincing yourself of pretty much whatever is useful at the time, or whatever is comfortable at the time. So you can argue from a position of knowledge and authority, essentially, that you are big brain and you are smart and you are doing the right thing because you looked it up and you did a Google search, like that kind of thing. There's usually not the self-awareness to be able to say, I might be wrong on this, or why don't I look up the other side of this and give it a real fair shake, and really try to, hold two ideas in my head at the same time and say, what if this were the case? What if this were true? What would it imply? How would it break other things? And that's where things like pattern matching comes up. Pattern matching is always something that's going to be useful in any human interaction, because humans are always, humans create patterns, humans replicate patterns, humans repeat actions over and over again. And doing that can make you predictable, and being predictable means you can decide, you can see, over the horizon, see what's going to come up next, and you can see a massive action and go, hang on a sec, this feels like that's going to be the outcome, and make that decision. And what becomes more interesting is when that type of thing happens automatically or subconsciously, and that's a thing that happens to me a lot. I get, gut feelings about things, and I get, some of it is, some of the decisions I make, I have full faculty over, and I decide, I can see why these things kind of remind me of that thing, and I'm not gonna be okay with this. I don't like this. But there are also probably more instances of me looking at a situation and going, oh, this looks nice. And then the more I learn about it, the nicer it looks, but it begins to look a little bit too nice, like too unbelievable, too good to be true, that kind of thing. And then distrust starts to build. And that'll get to a point where I have, like, almost mental blocks, where I'm like, I'm not able to process that, I'm not going to intake that, I'm not even going to research that. That can be kind of a God thing, where it's like, you should stay away from that. That's going to be a bear trap for you. Like, you're going to get stuck in that for a long time. And we see that with things like Peterson. So being able to find those things and have your brain, almost subconsciously in the background working out these things, you don't really get a lot of control over that. But what you do get is the actual scientific explanation of it is, well, it's not an explanation really, it's just science. You're like, I'm going to try this thing out. I'm going to try listening to this whenever I get that weird feeling that, this doesn't seem quite right, even though I have absolutely zero empirical evidence for why this should not be right. And that has worked out. That's actually why I became religious, because it's like, this thing kind of works, and then you try it out more and you get more invested, and you're like, this continues to win, this continues to operate at a successful, my outcome is positive, this is something that I want to keep going. Even if you don't understand it, you can understand at least the outcome of it, and anyone can do that. If it hurts when you do this, don't do that. If it's good when you do this, then do that. They're successful things that you can apply. And they're things that do not necessarily require any type of intelligence. And that's the thing. It's like, like I said, the intelligence argument, having a high IQ gets you some things, but it certainly doesn't get you everything. It actually probably doesn't even get you most things. It opens up more doors for you. Again, it's the caliber argument. You can have more effect on the target when you... Oh, that was a terrible parking job. You can have more impact on the target, if you have the ammunition, and you are willing to fire the gun, and you hit the target, and it's the right target. All of those things have to happen. And that's where you get into this situation where people have, I've learned a lot of things from people who are demonstrably less smart than me. And that's kind of the way that I think about things is different. And I think that is a function. This is why I'm confused about my IQ, because it's like, it puts me in that midwit range, but I have very clear non-midwit tendencies. So that's what tells me that this is something that, it's kind of what I call temperament, even though there's probably a better word for it. It's just kind of like your natural tendency toward doing something or toward not doing something. Because you are, if you were raised in a situation that made you distrust authority, and then you get into a situation where you are supposed to trust authority, and they have all the reason and the facts and the logics of why you should trust their authority, you can just say, nah, I don't like that. I don't feel that. I'm not doing that. And the only reason you're doing it is because, it's just your tendency. It's the way you were raised. It's your temperament, whatever it is. And you can be someone who is very trusting of authority and just like, sure, why would they do something evil? Why would they do that? Like, that would be wrong. Bad things are bad. Why would someone do a bad? And you can be someone who says, all these people, they wake up, sheeple, I'm going to be counterintuitive, or counterculture to everything. Like, everyone wants to turn right. Everyone wants to stop at the red light. I'm going to go at the red light. Like, it can be bad in either direction. But all of that is a function of where you're going to be targeting, like where you're aiming that gun, what you're going to be shooting at, and what you're going to be having an impact on. The other thing is, as you are intelligent, whatever that intelligence is, you apply it in a certain way, and you apply it in a way that is usually in line with your worldview. So smart people generally view the world differently than people who are not smart, or people who are average intelligence, I should say. And if you have, you're trying to create an ad campaign to convince a mass of people to do a thing, well, guess what? You are top 5%, top 1%. You have a very different worldview than a mass of people. And it's very likely that whatever you try to do is not going to have an impact on a mass of people. You should probably do something that you think will have no impact and is silly and is stupid and no one would fall for it. And then that would probably work. So there are these different instances of you basically where a higher IQ is a detriment, where it's something that will actually hurt your endeavors. There's plenty of people, I forget what book I was reading. I talked about two people who had the same IQ, basically, or within a couple points. And one was a screaming success, and the other was not. The other was just relegated to writing minor academic papers. And the difference was the connections of that person had. And, you know, it's not what you know, it's who you know. That's an old saying. But having that high IQ can be a hindrance if you're not capable of communicating with other people, which there is the communications gap is a real thing. And it's something that if you do have a higher IQ, you need to practice, you need to focus on. That is some other indicator that I have a closer to average IQ that I have. I feel like it should be lower than 120. But again, I do a lot of stuff that is not, that is novel, and that is out of band for, I'm thinking that is out of band for what normal people do, and that can be just like, just like messed up firing synapses as far as I'm concerned. A light form of brain damage. And it sometimes feels that way, but it still becomes useful, which is why I pursue it, and why I let it happen when it starts to happen, and why when my brain just won't shut up about a thing and I don't understand why, I have to spend some time on it and let it figure something out, and then it's like, okay, I'm done with this now. You're like, okay, what do we do with it? I'm like, yeah, nothing. And then later it comes up, years later. So it's very strange, and it's almost not an optimal way to work. I think the proper way would be a smart person figures out the thing and then conveys the idea to someone who can do good process, and then that person processes the development of, is this good, is this bad, what things do we want to change, do we update, do we upgrade, do we I don't want to say dumb it down, but do we change the interface, do we change it so that it has a broader appeal. And then someone builds that into something that can be easily produced by people of even lower required intelligence. Because, like, I thought about it recently, and, like, there are like, I have so few instances where my brain is able to just chill out. And it's, when I actually think about it, it's actually really concerning, almost. It's not necessarily a happy state, and it's not something that people should strive for. And this idea of IQ worship and IQ defense, of course, to be like, oh, well, if we have the high IQ, then we're better than them, and if they have the low IQ, then they're worse than us. Like, worse how? Better how? It just doesn't make much sense to me. It's always bothered me. Because there is some other component to it, it's the gun analogy is a really good one. And if you're someone who has a very small bore, low IQ, but you pull the trigger a lot and you're aiming right at that weak point, well, you're going to accomplish a lot more than someone who has a giant bore and who has a cannon and has it aimed in the wrong direction and has pulled the trigger once ever. Yeah, it's all just weird to me. I don't know.